Greetings and welcome back to Evolving Vibes. So glad to have you back. So glad that you chose to join me, and I do hope that you enjoy this video as well. So today's video, I was trying to consider what I wanted to do, considering it's the full moon energy, because we do have a full moon today. And as I was thinking about it, it sort of just came to me. And it's like, I'm going to do a video on divination and specifically on scrying and talk a little bit about the whole thing and offer some ideas and concepts that work for me that you may find interesting or you may find great or not great at all. The whole concept of my channel is I'm sharing with you my personal experience, my personal path, and things that resonate with me. So if you do find that what I'm bringing forward to you resonates with you, then outstanding. I'm glad I was able to be of some service to you. And I want you to take that with you. If some things don't resonate with you, feel free to leave it on behind, right? We don't have to carry around stuff that we don't agree with or doesn't resonate with us. So just enjoy the video. And as always, please be sure, if you can, like, subscribe, leave me a comment, hit that notification bell. That goes a huge, long way with my videos being promoted on YouTube, and goes a huge, long way with growing my channel and allowing me to grow my content. And as always, if you have specific content ideas you'd like to see, feel free to leave that in the comment down below, and I'll be sure to respond to it and give it some serious thought as far as putting a video together for that. Before today, let's talk a bit about divination before we get into scrying, and talk a bit about what it means to me and what it can mean to you as well. So when I look at divination personally, I consider it one of the great magics. It's one of the things that we can do actively and actually participate in communication with the sacred, with the divine, with the universe, with whatever deity you worship or that you feel closest to. That's the ability we have with divination, to open up that two-way communication back and forth and listening to what's being said to us, either through thought, through words, through sounds we may hear, through things we might see, depending upon what you're using as a divination tool and depending upon how you interpret it, because it is all about your own very specific practice. And yes, like everything else that's worthwhile in life, divination, scrying, all of that takes practice. It takes you being an active participant in practicing, and it takes you to be an active observer when you're actually doing it. But we'll talk more about that just a little bit later. So when we look at divination, what types are there, right? And honestly, I could spend probably around 20 minutes just listing things that people do from a divination standpoint. To start off with, divining rods. Those are actually a form of divination, right? But the most common form that people use that I know of, or that I'm going to list here today, and again, I'm not excluding anything because I don't believe in it. If I'm excluding it, it's probably because I didn't want to have a huge long list and bore you with all of that, right? But runes are really important divination too, as is tarot cards. I'm a professional tarot reader. That's one of the things that I do for a living. And so that is invaluable to me in order to provide that service to others. Astrology is another divination too, as bones, tossing bones or tea leaves or coffee grounds. Stones obviously are a divination too, as is pendulums and as is scrying, which we'll be talking a little bit more about in just a few minutes into the video. So, what do I feel that divination actually is? I think it's a source of communication, right? We're communicating with our subconscious mind, which in fact is in tune with the sacred, with the universe, with the divine, with the all. Depending upon what you want to identify that larger entity as being, that's what we're actually communicating with. Because let's remember, the universe is conscious, and the universe is part of the all, or actually is the all, and we are part of the all itself. So it's having that communication and that open dialogue with the all, with the universe. Divination is available to anybody, and you've probably done it even without realizing it. But if you do practice divination, you're going to see as you go on, it becomes easier and easier and easier to open up that communication conduit and to be able to go back and forth. And it's great to get guidance from the divine. It's great to get a heads up from the divine. But all in all, it's something that I feel strongly about practicing, something that I do, as I said, on a daily basis and around moon cycles. And so certainly I endorse it because it does help with a lot of personal questions and personal guidance as well. So today it's all about scrying, right? And it's all about what it is to scry, what it is that we do to scry, and how we go about the process of preparing to scry, and what are we going to use, right? So to start off with, the word scry comes from descry, D-E-S-C-R-Y. And descry actually means to reveal. So when you look at scrying, it's revealing. Revealing inner thought, revealing messages from the divine or the universe, and revealing answers to questions that you may have put forward when you began scrying. But when we go through how this happens, it's not like we're hearing a voice. Maybe it is, depends on the individual. My personal experience is when I'm scrying, images will pop up into my head, depending on what I'm using for scrying. Images will pop up into my head. I'll see images in a crystal ball that I'm using, or in smoke, or in a flame if I'm doing it through that standpoint. Sometimes just racing thoughts go through my head. Or, as I said, images, words, music does come into play sometimes, as well as external actual sounds. When you're scrying and you start hearing owls, or you start hearing very specific things, that meaning that it has to you is probably the message that you're actually getting from the universe. Let's not forget that everything we do is based upon us, based upon our intent, based upon our will, and based upon our interpretation. So when we work as at scrying and we work at divination, we're actually the ones that are going to determine the meaning based upon our interpretation of what we see. And that's what it's all about. And that's what makes each reader equally effective and equally different. The way I read tarot, or the way I read a crystal ball, is probably very much different than the way another reader does so, the way another psychic medium will do so. Because it's all about what niche works for me and what niche works for you. And it's also all about how we interpret the message that we're getting, who we might be getting that message from, what the message might actually be, and what means it's utilizing to come in as a message. So it's all about the individual. And how do you get to know what works for you and what doesn't work for you? Give you 3 guesses. Practice, practice, and practice. The more you practice, the more astute you become with it. Same thing goes with tarot readings. People say, oh, I can't learn to read tarot. It's 78 cards. That's way too complicated. Yeah, if you keep that mindset, you're not going to be able to read tarot. You're not going to be able to remember the cards. You're not going to be able to go through the meaning. However, it's all up to you. You don't need to limit yourself. So you don't have to say, oh, I'm not a psychic. I can't do this. Because guess what? We all have that third eye. We all have that second sight. It's whether or not we exercise it in order to be able to utilize it more freely and more effectively. It's all about what we do for ourselves and what we do to prepare ourselves. So clearly, the more often you practice reading tarot, the more often you practice scrying, the more often you practice meditation, the easier, the more efficient, and the more effective you're going to be at divination. It's really, like everything else in magic, all up to you and all up to what works for you and how you want it to work for you. Now, when we look at scrying specifically, There's a lot of different common ways to scry. I'm listing 9 of them because I usually stop at odd numbers, and 9 is one of my favorite numbers, so that's where I decided to stop. So when we look at it, one way of scrying is by reading wax. What you do is you take a wax candle, clearly, and you let the wax drip on a wet surface, and then you look and interpret the shapes to that. And you interpret what it might mean to you, what it might mean to the question that you're asking, right? Another way is clouds. Who didn't do that as a kid? Stare up at the clouds and start picking out shapes and things of that nature. So that's an easy one to get practice at doing because you're already attuned to doing that practice as a kid. So if you just go out there on a nice day and you lay outside and you just start staring at the clouds, you'll be amazed at what that opens up for you. If you ask very specific questions, it's even going to be more effective for you. Like with everything else, scrying really does require very specific input from you in order for you to be able to interpret the message. So if you're asking a specific question, you're going to be working with the universe to get a very specific answer. If you do it for meditation, great. Do it for meditation. But if you do it to get an answer to something or for open communication, you want to do it with things like, what should my next step be? Where am I on my path? Is my path the correct one for me? Things like that, right? So clouds is a good way to start off when you're new at divination and you want to get practice at opening up that third eye. Another way of scrying, the third way, is mirrors. And these aren't in any type of order, of course, but I'm scrying with a mirror. There's 2 ways of doing that. The first way is staring into a mirror. And you can do that and work on some soul work as well, which I'll talk about in just a little bit. And you can do that to see what images pop into your head. It takes a little bit of time, it takes a little bit of practice. The other way of doing it is with a blackened mirror. So you know how mirrors have that silver coating in the back so that it's reflective. Black mirrors are either a pane of glass with black paper behind it, or a pane of glass that black paint has been applied, and staring into that blackness in order to get images and get messages from the divine as well. Another way is water. There's a lot of different ways of doing it with water. You can do it by a riverside, you can do it in the ocean, whatever that might be. It's up to you. But 2 of the more common ways of doing it in your own home is taking a dark bowl, whether it be a brown bowl or a black bowl, something that's really dark and opaque. Putting water in it. Setting everything up and then staring into the water. Some people will take small little pebbles or stones and drop them in and look and interpret the ripples within the water. That's something you can do as well. But scrying with water is probably one of the more common forms of scrying that's out there. Another way is oil. Take oil, put it again on a wet surface, whether it be in water, on something wet, and just look at the oil and interpret the imagery coming off of the light reflecting off the oil. You can also take oil in a small container or small vial and put it in front of a flame and just stare into the oil that way as well. Putting it in a container and staring at the oil while the candles are burning around it, and interpreting the light coming off that oil. There's a lot of different ways with oil, but mostly it's based upon interpreting the light that's coming off of it because it's such a reflective surface. Another way is fire. Probably one of the oldest, if not the oldest way. And that would be staring into a candle, staring into a fireplace, staring into a fire pit. Whatever thing that you might have that has fire, staring into it, oil lamps, whatever. And looking at that flame and really, really focusing on that flame, and you'll start to get images that pop up into your mind. You'll start to get words that pop up into your mind, or you may start seeing images within the flame itself or the raising smoke. But it's very effective. We all do it. If we've been camping and by a campfire, you'll find people just zoning out into that fire. They're meditative. They're in a meditative state, a state of deep relaxation, and that's exactly where you want to be when you're scrying. And we'll talk more about that in just a minute as well. Another way of doing it is smoke. Where there's fire, there's smoke, right? So doing it with smoke. A lot of the indigenous people in America utilized smoke as a form of divination. But looking at the smoke rising off a candle, what direction is it going into? Because each direction can have a different meaning within itself depending upon how you read smoke divination. What shapes are coming out of that smoke is another way. Is there smoke coming out is another way. So there's a lot of different ways and methods of interpreting with smoke. And again, a very common one for people to do. I've done it with incense. I'll light incense on my table. I've got a specific incense burner I use for this. And then I'll just stare at the smoke coming off to see what kind of shapes it makes and to see what speaks to me from my subconscious, which i.e. is the divine or the universe, depending upon how you want to say it or how you want to call it. Another way is crystal scrying. I do that quite a lot. I've got a lot of crystals that I utilize for that, and I've got a big crystal ball that I utilize for that. You've probably seen it on my altar if you've watched my altar tour videos. But that crystal ball is what I use on the new moon and on the full moon for scrying. That's my go-to tool for scrying, if you will. And another way is through the eyes, staring into someone's eyes. And that's called, excuse me, soul gazing. And you're staring into someone's eyes and you're staring into their soul and you're getting imagery and messages coming from that. Going back to the mirror, as I said I would, if you stare in front of a mirror, you can actually do the eye gazing or soul gazing to yourself and go into another level of scrying as well as divination and really see what kind of messages come out from that, what kind of images come out from that. It's very interesting to do. It's one of my favorite things to do, and I do that quite a lot as well. As I said, a lot of everything that I'm talking about here are things I do on a regular basis because it resonates with me. Now for some tea. So, as we look at all of this, what's happening? Well, we're using our third eye. And the more we focus on our third eye opening and listening to our intuitive self, the easier and easier it becomes to be able to do that. And that goes for divination, it goes for your psychic abilities, it goes for being able to go out and read a person within microseconds as to whether or not you want to share energy with them or if you want to deviate from the path just to not be around them. So it's all in how we work and practice this in order to make us efficient, effective, and speed. When you're first starting out in scrying, I'm not going to lie, it takes a little while for you to be able to get to that level of opening up that communication, because what happens initially that we got to practice that is the deviating thoughts that we have, the random thoughts that we have while we're doing it, and any other type of distractions that we may have, which brings us to the space that we want to utilize for scrying. First and foremost, as you can see, it's starting to get dark out. So later on tonight, I'm going to be doing some scrying, and I'm going to do a part 2 of this video with utilizing some of the tools that I utilize on my altar to scry, as well as how I use them. But when we look at scrying, things that we want to keep in mind in order for it to be more effective for us. So scrying requires us looking into a surface in order to get imagery out of it, right? So it stands to reason most of the time that we're scrying, we're probably going to want to do it in a darkened area. Maybe a dark room with only candles on, maybe in a darkened area. And it's especially true when you're first starting off, because you do want to maintain that ability to see as much as possible and to get as much as possible out of the experience. As you grow stronger and stronger at it, it's easier and easier to do during the day, in light, at any given time that you choose that you want to do it. But again, don't forget, keep up the practice and keep that open mind and understand it's all about interpretation. You are not going to get a telegram message from the universe saying, bitch, stop what the fuck you're doing. Not going to happen. So it's going to be little things like, why am I feeling hesitant about that next step? If you're feeling hesitant about it, and it's coming out definitely in scrying, then it's probably something where you want to step back away from and reevaluate where you're going with all of this and what you want to do with it. So, we got ourselves a dark place. Now we want to make sure that we're comfortable. We want to make sure that we're not going to have any distractions, like my little cat behind me right there you're looking at right now. We want to make sure, because she's a little bit fluffy too, that you're not going to have pets or any other animals jumping up on your altar while you're doing it and lighting their hair on fire. Talking about you, Reese, how many times have we done that? Yep, and so it's things like that that you want to consider and you want to prepare for to make your space magical, calming, and opening up, that's right, that third eye, and opening up that second sight because of doing so. So when we go to scry, step by step, we should cleanse ourselves. So it's always helpful if you give yourself a really nice shower. If you're not going to shower, then really take whatever incense you like. Personally, I like frankincense for this. And burn frankincense and then cleanse yourself within the smoke of the frankincense. Really imagine yourself being cleansed, your energy being cleansed, and building up your energy for both divination as well as for protection, because we're going to talk about that too. And then it's actually setting up your space. How do I set my space up? Depending on who you talk to, some people say, I like casting a circle. Other people say, I just sage the area. So me personally, what I like to do is relative to what I'm actually doing. Do I cast circles? Yeah. Do I put a protective energy around my area and around me? Always. I may not always cast a circle, but I'll always put up a protective layer of energy surrounding me and everything that I'm utilizing for scrying. I'll cleanse the area. I'll use sage. Like I said, I'll use frankincense, which is more common for me. I'll be honest. I use frankincense and myrrh a lot more than I use sage. I do have sage that I do on new moons for the whole house, but to be honest, I use frankincense more frequently. I just like frankincense. I like the smell. I like the way it burns. Just a lot of things that's solely and prejudiced on my end as to why I use frankincense. But whatever incense you use, whatever means you use to cleanse, you can use a sage spray. You can use anything that you determine to be sacred enough to cleanse your area. Because nothing's sacred until we make it sacred. And nothing's effective until we say it will be effective. So it's important for you to understand that you use you and what it is that you like using for tools to cleanse your area. After you've cleansed your area and cleansed your tools, i.e. whatever divination tool you're going to be utilizing, whether it be a crystal ball, whether it be stones, whatever, make sure that's cleansed as well. Once you do that, you want to get yourself into that meditative state. There's a lot of different ways of doing it. When I scry, I actually search YouTube and I find the frequency that really works well with opening up that third eye, that second sight. There's a lot of different types of music for divination. There's a lot of different types of music for meditation, as well as for psychic work and psychic ability. Anything that resonates with you from the standpoint of how it harmonizes with your soul is the music that you want to use. I personally, like I said, have a couple of favorites that I use that are typically very specific frequencies for psychic work or second sight work, for meditation. So whatever works for you is what you want to use. And you want to set the mood by putting that on, having the candles on, having that incense burning, being completely cleansed either through shower or through incense, and then casting your protective area. Whether it be casting a circle, whether it be casting a protective light and bubble around you and the tools that you're using, and whether that be just in what you're saying and how you're saying it. Like one of the things I do when I sit down and I'm getting into that meditative state is I'll say, I am now opening the door of communication with the universe. I shall be stepping through that door and communicating with the all and with the universe. Everything behind that door other than me is not invited back with me. Once I leave and I close that door, everything else will stay behind. Now, I don't say it exactly like that, but you get the idea. And then when I'm finishing my session, I'll do the same thing, closing the door, stepping back through, and then closing the door, and going back into this realm, if you will. So once you get that relaxation going, once you get those candles going, that incense going, everything cleansed, and you're ready to go, just start staring into that scrying surface, whether it be a crystal ball, crystals, mirrors, water, whatever. Just start staring into it. Keep your mind clear. The more you try to focus on keeping your mind clear, I promise you, the less likely you're going to be able to keep your mind clear. So keep practicing it until it becomes second nature, which doesn't take that long. But just start staring into that surface and understand and remember, as you're doing this, you're now working as an observer, not an active participant. You, this physical decaying shell, is sitting there as an observer. Your mind is sitting there as an observer. The participant to all of this is your subconscious mind and your third eye or second sight, whichever way you want to say it. But sit there and understand you're just there to observe. So the more often you really focus on that and realize that you're an observer and you're observing and you're just watching what's happening like it's a movie reel, the easier and easier it becomes for you to scry, and the quicker you can scry as well. So definitely food for thought. Always remember, you're an observer, not a participant. Once you start relaxing and once you start recognizing you're an observer, not a participant, you're going to start experiencing some form of communication. Now, there can be random thoughts or words that pop into your head. It could be very specific songs and music that pops into your head that may have some meaning to you. It can be images that you see in the surface itself, or images that pop into your head like a movie reel or like a photograph. It all depends on you and your interpretation. It all depends upon how that's being communicated to you. And sometimes even by whom. If you've got a loved one reaching out to you, it may be a song that you guys shared that pops up into your head, or a very specific color, or word, or even scent, because with scrying, even smells can occur. Now, it may not be that you can smell the actual smell, but you actually, in your mind, might be, oh, Mom, I remember how Mom always used to wear this perfume. Things like that is what I mean as far as the interpretation of the message. If you start thinking that, like, oh, Mom, I remember the perfume Mom used to wear, say hi. Hey, Mom, is that you? You reaching out to me? That sort of thing. Obviously not out loud, but obviously doing it as you're scrying up in here. The other thing you want to consider is while you're scrying, it's all about a very specific question or a very specific goal. You can practice scrying by just staring without any specific question and see what pops up. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're looking for a very specific answer, you want to have a very specific question. Should I do this? Am I going to be happy with this? If I choose not to do this, what may happen? That's pretty strong questions to ask. Am I going down the right path? Are there going to be any roadblocks in front of my path that I need to be aware of? I'm in a roadblock right now. What's my best detour around it to get back on my path? Things like that. That's where divination really comes into play and really plays a strong role in our spiritual growth as well as our spiritual self. Some other things to consider with scrying is very simply, you can do it just for your own soul. You can do it for yourself. What do I need to know? Where should I be? What should my focus be on going forward? So you get the idea with how you want to word things and what it is you want to word. So I'm not going to bore you much further with any of that. So at the very end, when you finally realize or feel that the scrying session is done, What you want to do is bring yourself back into this realm through that door, closing that door, and making sure to, again, give that directive. Everything that participated in my experience, I thank, and I'm glad that you were there for me and to help present this message or this answer to me. I am now leaving the session and walking back through that door into my own realm, and I invite none to come through that door with me. None are welcome back through that door. Thank you, and be gracious, of course, and then close the door. Once you've done that, and the scrying session's done, it's important, especially when you're first beginning with all this, but it's important all the way through, I still do it, to make sure to have a notebook or some form of notepad around with you so that you can write down what you saw, what you experienced, what happened. I start off with writing down what the goal of the scrying session was, and then I'll write down what my experience throughout the scrying session was, just to get an idea and to, again, get some focus on what kind of things come to me. Are they continuous? If each scrying session, the same words, the same images come up to mind, it could be a message that I'm overlooking or I'm ignoring, and it could be something that I need to really interpret a little bit better because maybe there's a meaning in there that I'm not picking up that I need to. And that's why the universe is actually telling me all of that over and over and over again. Now, for scrying and for divination work, some of the things I use for scrying, this is one. This stone is one of my favorite stones I use for scrying. This one I use, as you can probably tell, during the daylight because the way the light reflects off of it. But I also use it in candlelight because it's amazing in the candlelight. And there's a lot of imagery and a lot of message that will come off of this stone. This stone is always on my altar. And it's something that I go to many, many a time. Another ball that I use is this crystal ball right here. This is one of my favorite ones as well. It's amazing in the candlelight, and it's something that allows me to get into that scrying state pretty quickly and pretty easy. This is another ball that I use. If you notice, this looks a lot like Earth. So I ask a lot of things of this about travel and about very specific things on my path because, again, it reminds me of this realm. It reminds me of this experience. And so it does help me to ground with it and get messages out of it. This is a new addition to the family. I got this at a fair not too long ago. And I do like this for scrying. In the candlelight, it's amazing. And this lighting is not doing this any justice whatsoever. But it's an amazing little stone for scrying. Now, I talked about mirrors and I talked about scrying with mirrors. This is the mirror that I use for scrying. It opens up and it's a two-sided mirror, as you can see. And it works great for scrying, either holding it this way or holding it this way, depending upon what you want to do. And it sits on a table just like that as well, so it's great. If I want to have it in this manner, I can. There's a lot of different ways of positioning this, but it's just an amazing piece, and sometimes I'll just stare at the case itself in order to scry. It's really reflective, and it's really soothing and comforting to touch. Of course, with scrying, I also use, or I should say for divination, I use a pendulum quite a lot. And we'll go over the pendulum divination and make a whole video on it, all within itself, down the road. But this is one of the many pendulums I have. I use a couple of different ones, but this one's one of the ones that I use, I'd say, fairly frequently. And of course, with divination, I have my tarot cards. So this deck is kind of a cool deck. It's one of my go-to decks for special readings, but it's a great little deck. It's, again, speaks to me. It's what resonates with me, and feel free to get out there and find what works for you. The more you practice, the more you do, the easier and easier and easier it will be to find out what works for you, what resonates for you. Down the road, we'll be doing some other types of videos with tarot, going over tarot decks, going over tarot itself, and other divinations as well. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you might want to see. If you want to expand upon that topic and see very specifically some other things, I'll be glad to do that. And like I said, part 2 of this video is going to be actually setting up how I scry my area and what kind of scrying I utilize. I won't actually scry, of course, because you can't really do that and be shooting a video. But certainly I'll be talking about it and setting the mood for it, if you will. So I do hope you enjoyed this video. Please, please, please let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe, leave me a message. And as always, I want you to be safe, be well, and be blessed.